Skip Bayless said, I would like to know who exactly working for the NCAA chose to post praise of the recent pro exploits of several former college stars while omitting Caitlin Clark's recent achievements. This screams intentional. Who is responsible and why?
That is the question that turns a routine NCAA graphic into a controversy. If this was simply a celebration of record-setting former college stars, how does Caitlin Clark disappear from it completely?
This is the NCAA's official Twitter or whatever, and it says they made their mark in college. Now they're setting records on the biggest stage. And you have Olivia Miles, you have Angel Reese, you got A'ja Wilson, you got Paige Bueckers. Caitlin Clark's nowhere to be found in this.
And look carefully at what was actually posted, because this is where the argument has to begin, with evidence instead of outrage. The NCAA promoted former college stars now setting professional records and highlighted A'ja Wilson, Paige Bueckers, Olivia Miles, and Angel Reese. Clark was not included. That omission by itself does not prove somebody inside the NCAA deliberately targeted her. There could be editorial criteria we have not seen, a limited number of slides, or simply a poor selection decision. But later in this slideshow, there is one detail that makes the absence much harder to dismiss as random, and that is the part worth holding on to.
Face baiters, boy.
I don't think it's the Fever fans. I think you have to be careful when you say like the Fever fans, because I don't think it's the Fever fans. I think it's the people that wanted Caitlin Clark to be a certain type of way, and they thought that she was, and so they became Caitlin Clark fans, assuming that, and then they realized like, oh no, she's actually not racist.
Before getting there, Jonquel Jones made a completely different point that deserves more attention than it usually gets. She separated Caitlin Clark from people who might try to attach their own beliefs to her name, and she also separated those people from the entire Fever fan base. That distinction matters. When a player becomes as culturally enormous as Clark, millions of people suddenly gather under one label: Clark fans, Fever fans, women's basketball fans. Pretending every person inside that audience thinks the same way is intellectually lazy. You can condemn ugly behavior from individual people without assigning that behavior to every fan wearing the same jersey. Jones also went further. Her point was essentially that some people may have become fans because they assumed Clark represented something politically or culturally that she never actually claimed to represent. Once they discovered she was not that person, the assumption fell apart. Whether you agree with every part of that interpretation or not, notice what Jones refused to do. She did not turn Caitlin Clark herself into the symbol of somebody else's misconduct. And that connects directly to the NCAA story in a way that is easy to miss. Clark keeps becoming the center of arguments she did not personally start. A social media graphic goes up, she is missing, and suddenly, everyone wants to determine what the omission says about the institutions around her. The real question is whether there is enough evidence to call this deliberate.
No, that was Jonquel Jones basically coming out and saying, hey, people need to be careful when they're saying, oh, Caitlin Clark's racist. She's not racist. Jonquel Jones came out and said herself, yo, she's not racist at all. All of her fans are not racist. You need to be careful when saying all Caitlin Clark fans or all Indiana Fever fans are racist, because
that correction from Jones is important because broad accusations work in both directions. If it is unfair to label every Clark or Fever fan because of the worst people in a giant audience, it is also premature to say the entire NCAA is conspiring against Clark because of one post. What you can do is examine the post itself. Who was chosen? What records were highlighted? What obvious names were excluded? And most importantly, did the NCAA accidentally create a comparison that points directly toward Clark while still refusing to mention her? That last question is where this gets much more uncomfortable.
So they got a slideshow going. Former stars setting records in the W. Okay, here it says A'ja Wilson joins Diana Taurasi as the only players in WNBA history with 100 career 25-plus point games. Paige Bueckers is the fastest player in WNBA history to reach 1,400 points and 400 assists. Olivia Miles is second for the most assists by a rookie in WNBA history.
Now the structure becomes clearer. This was not a generic collage of famous players. The NCAA was specifically identifying statistical accomplishments in the WNBA. A'ja Wilson was recognized for joining Diana Taurasi in an elite scoring category. Paige Bueckers received her own milestone. Olivia Miles was highlighted for ranking second in rookie assists. And that word second changes everything. If you are celebrating somebody for being second on a historical list, the identity of number one is automatically relevant. You have created the comparison yourself. The graphic does not exist in a vacuum anymore, It asks the viewer to appreciate Miles because of where she ranks relative to everyone who came before her. So who was first? That answer is exactly why Skip Bayless reacted so strongly, and it is why calling Clark's absence a simple oversight becomes more difficult than it was 30 seconds ago. But even here, there is a difference between saying the omission looks strange and pretending we know the motive of whoever assembled the post. We do not. What we do know is that the NCAA picked a category in which Clark is directly connected to the accomplishment being celebrated.
Well, if you pointed out Olivia Miles being second, why wouldn't you post who's first? You know who's first? Caitlin Clark. And that is what Skip is talking about. This was intentional, them leaving her out of this. Why would you point out Olivia Miles is second for the most assists by a rookie in WNBA history, but leave out the person who's first, which is Caitlin Clark?
There it is. Olivia Miles gets celebrated for being second, while the player identified in this discussion as first is Caitlin Clark. That is the strongest piece of the case, not because second place can never be celebrated independently. Of course it can. Miles deserves recognition for what she accomplished. Her achievement does not become less impressive because Clark owns the top spot. The problem is editorial consistency. Imagine an organization creates a graphic about former college athletes setting professional records. One slide specifically celebrates the second highest rookie assist total in league history. The person above her is not some obscure player disconnected from the NCAA's own history. It is Caitlin Clark, one of the most accomplished and visible college basketball players of her generation. Now add another layer. Clark did not merely pass through college basketball. She left as the NCAA Division I all-time leading scorer. That gives the NCAA an unusually direct relationship to her story. This is not a case where fans are forcing an unrelated superstar into every conversation. If your theme is former college stars making professional history, Clark is an obvious candidate before you ever start discussing Miles' ranking. That still does not establish intent, and this is where some commentary goes too far. An omission can look inexplicable without proving hatred, jealousy, sabotage, or some coordinated institutional agenda. Unless somebody involved explains the selection process, motive remains speculation. But accidental or intentional, it was a remarkably avoidable decision. Somebody selected the records, somebody selected the players, somebody approved the graphic, and nobody apparently looked at a slide saying second most rookie assists and asked whether the person in first should also appear. That is why Skip's actual wording is stronger than simply declaring guilt. He asked who made the decision and why. Those are answerable questions.
Okay, and I'm going to show it to you. We're going to get to what Skip said first. Okay, Skip Bayless said, I would like to know who exactly working for the NCAA chose to post praise of the recent pro exploits of several former college stars while omitting Caitlin Clark's recent achievements. This screams intentional. Who is responsible and why?
Listen to that wording again. Skip says it screams intentional, but then he asks who was responsible and why. He is giving his interpretation while acknowledging that the explanation has not been established. That is the lane the criticism should stay in. Because there are really three possibilities here. The first is harmless editorial judgment. The NCAA wanted a particular mix of names and achievements, and Clark simply did not make this specific carousel. The second is incompetence. Nobody noticed how bizarre it would look to celebrate the runner-up in a category while omitting the record holder, especially when that record holder is also an NCAA icon. The third is deliberate exclusion. Only the people involved can tell us which one happened. But the first explanation becomes less convincing when you consider how naturally Clark fits the stated theme. This is also where the emotional reaction from Clark's supporters makes sense, even if you reject the most extreme interpretation. Fans have spent years watching every discussion around her become something bigger than basketball. Her popularity gets debated, her fan base gets debated, her treatment by opponents gets debated, her media coverage gets debated, her effect on ratings gets debated. Even when she is not speaking, other people are speaking about what she supposedly represents. So when the NCAA itself publishes a celebration of former college stars and Clark is absent, fans do not view that decision in isolation. They view it through everything that came before. The danger is that once every omission becomes evidence of hostility, you stop requiring proof. But the opposite danger exists too, dismissing every strange decision as coincidence, even when the editorial logic does not hold together. The reasonable position sits between those extremes. Ask for the criteria. Ask why these accomplishments were chosen. Ask whether Clark was intentionally excluded, then judge the answer.
The hate this girl gets, it comes from all directions, and it's really, really nasty. Angel Reese holds the records for most rebounds in a single game and most rebounds in a season. Caitlin Clark broke 62 records as a rookie. 62 records as a rookie. And y'all couldn't find one to post about, huh? These people are crazy.
The host points to another argument here, claiming Clark broke dozens of records during her rookie season and asking how the NCAA could not find a single accomplishment worth including. The precise total is less important than the larger point. Clark's professional resume gave an editor plenty of potential material. And that matters because selective recognition sends a message even when nobody intends one. Social media departments make judgment calls every day. They cannot feature every athlete. Every graphic excludes somebody. Usually that means nothing. But institutions also know that context changes how those choices will be received. If you make a post titled "Around Former College Stars Setting Records in the W," you are choosing a theme broad enough to include many players. Once Clark is missing, viewers naturally ask whether there was some hidden limitation. Maybe the post was focused on accomplishments from a particular period. Maybe it was tied to a specific group of recent games. Maybe there was another criterion that was obvious internally and invisible publicly. If that explanation exists, publishing it would settle much of this argument. But if there was no special criterion, and the selections were simply hand-picked examples of notable former NCAA stars breaking WNBA records, then the criticism gets much stronger. Because Clark is not a marginal case, somebody had to stretch to include. Her college career is part of the NCAA's own record book. That leads to the deeper issue here. Recognition is not only about statistics, it is also about institutional memory.
Take a look at this here. Under Miles' photo, the caption was, "Second most assists in a season by a rookie." Why would they leave out first, especially when that person also holds the NCAA scoring record? She's the all-time NCAA leading scorer.
That is the contradiction sitting in the middle of the graphic. The caption celebrates second place in a rookie assist category, while Clark holds the #1 position discussed by the host, and Clark also finished her college career as the NCAA Division I all-time leading scorer. Now the controversy becomes less about whether Caitlin Clark needs another compliment. She does not need an NCAA Instagram slide to validate her career. The records exist whether the account posts them or not. The issue is what organizations choose to remember publicly. College sports spent years benefiting from the enormous attention surrounding Clark's Iowa career. Her games became national events. Her chase of the scoring record became mainstream sports news. People who rarely watched women's college basketball suddenly knew when Iowa was playing. Networks promoted those matchups accordingly. Then she moved to the WNBA, and her audience followed. That makes the NCAA's relationship to Clark materially different from the relationship between a random sports account and a popular athlete. This institution was the governing body of the competition in which she built that college legacy. So when its official account says, essentially, "Look at our former stars making professional history," Clark's absence is noticeable for reasons that go beyond fandom. And this is where the central question finally deserves an answer. Does this prove the NCAA was taking a deliberate shot at Caitlin Clark? No. The public evidence in this transcript does not prove motive. Does the graphic provide legitimate reasons for people to question the decision? Absolutely. Those two conclusions can coexist. In fact, holding both at the same time is much stronger than rushing toward either extreme. You do not need to invent a conspiracy to say the graphic was strange. And you do not need to pretend the omission was meaningless just because intent has not been demonstrated. The most damning part is not simply that Clark was absent. It is that the NCAA itself chose an achievement whose historical context points straight back to her.
She brought y'all most viewed national championship games ever. And y'all disrespecting? Why? Who was responsible for this?
And this is another piece people should separate into two different questions. First, what did Caitlin Clark mean to NCAA women's basketball? That can be evaluated using measurable things: records, audience interest, tournament attention, and the scale of her college career. Second, does the NCAA owe her inclusion in every graphic about successful former players? Obviously not. The controversy happens because this particular post lands directly between those two questions. Nobody reasonable is arguing that Clark must appear every time the NCAA mentions women's basketball. But once you deliberately choose a record category in which she holds the top position, excluding her becomes conspicuous. There is also a broader branding problem here for women's basketball. The sport has spent years asking for more attention, more investment, more coverage, more television exposure, and more respect. Now it has more eyeballs, and those eyeballs scrutinize everything. That is the trade-off that comes with growth. A social post that might once have passed with a few thousand reactions can now become a national argument. A questionable officiating call becomes a multi-day story. A coach's sentence from a press conference gets dissected word by word. A graphic omitting one superstar gets screen captured and debated across platforms. That is not necessarily bad. Major sports live under microscopes. The NFL, NBA, college football, and men's college basketball deal with this constantly. Women's basketball cannot simultaneously become a major mainstream product and expect small editorial decisions to remain unnoticed. The real adjustment is institutional. Teams, leagues, media outlets, and governing organizations now have to communicate with the awareness that millions of fans are checking consistency. If you publish historical rankings, people will know who is first. If you celebrate attendance, people will compare buildings. If you promote stars selectively, people will ask who was left out. That pressure is not unique to Caitlin Clark. Her scale simply makes her the clearest example.
We're going to start right here with Jonquel Jones. This was on the pivot. Now, I believe this was a little bit of time ago. It just came to my attention, so I'm covering it now, damn it. Okay.
Notice something else about the way this story developed. Even the source acknowledges that the Jonquel Jones interview was not brand new and had only recently come to his attention. That is useful context because social media often collapses separate moments into one giant argument, as if everything happens simultaneously. Jones's comments and the NCAA graphic are not evidence of one coordinated story. They are separate events being discussed together because both touch the enormous cultural conversation surrounding Clark. Keeping that distinction matters. Jones was discussing people projecting racial views onto Clark and the danger of describing an entire fan base as though every person inside it behaves identically. The NCAA controversy is an editorial selection question. Combining those topics can make the emotional temperature rise very quickly, but it can also blur what can actually be proved. The common thread is not a conspiracy. The common thread is projection. People keep using Caitlin Clark as a canvas for arguments much larger than one basketball player. Some critics want her to answer for conduct by people who support her. Some supporters interpret every criticism around her as evidence that basketball institutions resent her. Media personalities then amplify whichever interpretation produces the strongest reaction. Meanwhile, Clark can be nowhere near the conversation when it happens. That dynamic is part of why something as small as a carousel can explode. And if you are the NCAA, that should make precision more important, not less. You already know every Clark-related decision receives unusual scrutiny. Whether that level of scrutiny is fair becomes irrelevant once you know it exists. A competent communications team anticipates the obvious question before pressing post. Who is first on the rookie assist list? If the answer is Caitlin Clark, someone should anticipate that people will ask why second place was highlighted and first place disappeared.
Wow, the fact that they completely left her off of this, which it was clearly intentional. And I'm glad Skip Bayless is locked in and really calling this stuff out. Because this is ridiculous at this point. It's just like, come on, man. Come on. At some point, y'all got to knock it off. Knock it off.
This is where the source reaches its strongest conclusion and calls the exclusion clearly intentional. I would stop one step before that because the available evidence supports suspicion, not certainty. And ironically, stopping one step short makes the criticism harder to dismiss. You do not need to know what somebody inside the NCAA was thinking to point out that the final product failed a basic credibility test. If there is a benign explanation, give it. If there was a specific eligibility window for the featured records, state it. If the carousel was part of a series and Clark appeared elsewhere, provide that context. If it was simply an oversight, say so. But silence leaves everyone arguing about motive, because the visible evidence does not explain the choice. Skip Bayless asked two simple questions: who was responsible and why? Those are much better questions than pretending strangers on the internet can read the mind of an unnamed social media employee. And the answer matters beyond one graphic, because women's basketball is moving into a different media era. The audience is larger, the stars are more recognizable, the rivalries are louder. Fans now archive posts, compare statistics, replay interviews, and challenge narratives in real time. Institutions have to become more precise because the audience is becoming more sophisticated. Jonquel Jones's comments provide a useful lesson on the other side of that equation. Precision should apply to fans too. Do not take the worst behavior you can find online and attach it to every Clark supporter. Do not take the loudest account and make it representative of an entire arena. Judge specific behavior specifically. The same standard should apply when judging the NCAA. Criticize the actual decision. Demand the missing context. Do not manufacture evidence that is not there. And once you strip away all the noise, the actual decision is still extremely difficult to understand. The NCAA celebrated former college stars setting professional records. It selected a player for being second in a rookie assist category. The person identified as first was Caitlin Clark. Clark also left college as the NCAA Division I all-time leading scorer, yet she did not appear in the featured group. Maybe there is an innocent explanation, but the burden is now on the NCAA to provide it, because the graphic itself created the question.
Man, what says you? Get down in the comments. Let me know what you guys think. Just keep the vision. Make sure you...
So choose a side based on what is actually in front of us. Was Caitlin Clark's omission an intentional slight, or was this simply a badly constructed NCAA post that made an innocent decision look deliberate? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you want more breakdowns where we separate what can be proven from what is being assumed, like the video and subscribe.